Many in Connecticut just appalled by these shootings in Georgia. Fox 61's Dave Puglisi spoke with leaders who are condemning the rise in violence against Asian Americans.
It's senseless and it's unconscionable and it's deeply disturbing.
Those are the words State Senator Tony Hwang used to describe Tuesday's shooting spree at 3 different spas that killed 8 people in Atlanta, Georgia. 7 of them women, 6 of which are of Asian American descent.
People are targeting Asian American women, particularly vulnerable Asian American women.
Authorities say it's too early to determine a motive for the shooting, but say the suspect claimed to have a sex addiction. Still, it has Asian Americans concerned as attacks against them have significantly increased over the course of the pandemic.
The rhetoric of the Chinese virus, the Wuhan flu, I knew what was going to happen to people that that I care about and that I love.
It was those signs that prompted Mike Q to start an I Am Not a Virus campaign. The goal is to produce conversation and materials that break down the silos of stereotypes and hate against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders.
So there's a long legacy of hate and discrimination against Asian Pacific Americans, and that's not something that's well understood.
Stop AAPI Hate tracks attacks against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. They say there have been almost 4,000 attacks since March of 2020 reported to them. Former FBI Special Agent Kenneth Gray says those numbers may only be a fraction of the actual number.
The Uniform Crime Report is delayed by 2 years. Right now, the newest UCR report information is from 2019.
Gray says that local police departments are aware of these attacks and are doing what they can to respond to them. But that doesn't mean that they will stop these attacks from happening. Those I talked to say that begins with educating people about the bigotry facing Asian Americans. In New Haven, Dave Puglisi, Fox 61 News.